So I had the article of Susan B. Anthony, and reading through the article, it basically breaks down her court case in 1873, which she was arrested and tried for voting as a woman. And during those times, women weren't allowed to vote, which, along with other rights, they didn't have during that time. And she was taken to court, arrested, taken to court, and tried. And during that time, she used that court case after she was convicted guilty, because she didn't lie about voting or anything. She literally told them that, she voted, but that's because she should have a right to vote. So during that time, she talked about, how the laws were more made for men, and on the Declaration of Independence, it says "we the people," but at the end it's all signed by men, which is unfair because men are going to make laws and govern the country a lot differently than a woman would, or if a woman had rights. But during the court case, she was found guilty, fined $100, and during that time that they were giving her sentencing of the fine, and she let them know, she basically told them that she can't afford the $100 fine as she's $10,000 in debt. But during that time, after the judge basically told her that she can't stand until it's paid, that's when she turned to the people of the courtroom and basically discussed about how women should have rights, and it shouldn't, the country shouldn't just be governed by men, but instead have women, women's votes, or, women's ideas put into the air to be discussed. But she definitely adapted her speech basically to the women of America, and obviously to the men of America that would be willing to listen and help take a stand with the women, to give them that the men's voice to stand up for the women, because back then the women didn't have the really right to stand up for themselves, or else they would get arrested or something would happen. But she adapted it to that audience, try to get them to rise up, get the motivation to stand up against the government, the men that think that women shouldn't, should be oppressed, forever. And obviously that wasn't right. But she had a quote on page 179 where she went about, said, "Yes, but laws made by men, interpreted by men, and for the benefit of man." That article, that quote stuck out to me big time, because she basically put it on the table saying, everything was made or created by man, including laws and everything. And she even talks about going all the way back to the Declaration of Independence herself, and says, everything was signed by man, and there was nothing, put in there for women. It was all, talking about men and whatnot. But adapting to that audience, she basically telling them that, it's time to stand up and, tell the government what actually should be believed in, which was giving women the right to vote. And obviously it worked down the line, because the 15th Amendment was ratified to include women. But although, even with her adapting it to the audience, she definitely persuaded them by using appeals, because with appeals it's ethos, pathos, and logos. And obviously she used logos by bringing in evidence about Declaration of Independence, always favoring the man, and all the laws that oppressed women during them times. She brought all that out during her argument to the people of the court and everything. And obviously you can't really get emotions from reading, but you can definitely feel that there was a lot of emotions during that time because of the way she stood up and how direct she was on telling the courts and everything how, you know, things weren't right back then, and she was there to basically put it in front of them and stand by it. And that definitely brought the ethos to it, because her talking about that, you know, her having, you know, basically being able to stand up and right in front of the courts and tell them, you know, exactly what should be done or what's right, that should have gained, you know, the trust and the credibility of herself and whatnot. Because if someone didn't believe or didn't think it was right, why would they be standing up there in front of a United States courtroom and trying to plead their case if, you know, it wasn't right, or if she didn't have a good point on why things should change? Because if things didn't have to change, then obviously she wouldn't have been there standing up for it. Going on though, she definitely also used the persuasion seeking of argument, because, you know, during the court she obviously, you know, argued with them about why she was wanting to vote. And she quoted at the beginning on that as well about, you know, when the judge asked her if she had anything to say, and she basically, on page 179, she argued back saying, "Yes, Your Honor, I have many things to say, but my every right, constitutional, civil, political, and judicial, have been trampled upon. I have not only had no jury of my peers, but I have had no jury at all." Obviously, she's arguing to the judge that everybody there was clearly biased on women, because the laws during that time made it that way. Being biased during that time, I mean, it was just a normal occurrence, but she argued saying that regardless, she wouldn't have had a fair trial or anything because of the way people's beliefs were back then. And after that, you know, she got the court obviously tried her and found her guilty, but she also used another good quote afterwards when she was standing up and talking to the people. And she basically, on page 180, she said, "Before governments were organized, no one denies that each individual possessed the right to protect his own life, liberty, and property." And I like that quote because, you know, without a government, I mean, everybody should still obviously be able to protect themselves, you know, with rights, or, like she said, their liberty and property, because that's what that's what America stood upon, you know, was standing for what was right, you know. But it also brings a sort of aesthetic to the persuasion speaking, because bringing up, you know, about how there was, you know, without the government anyways, there should be rights for everybody, was kind of a way of showing the aesthetic and the beauty of, you know, being a man or woman, that everybody should have rights, and talking about this and, you know, putting women down on this is wrong. She goes on and talks about how our government is based on the idea of natural right of all members, but when they were talking about that, they didn't include women because women weren't thought of as an individual back in those days. And Susan B. Anthony was, you know, going to court and, you know, standing up for that, to prove that women, you know, are obviously people, and, you know, they should equally get as many rights as men should. And there shouldn't be a government or anything that, you know, goes after women or whatnot just because they want to have the rights of men. But furthermore, I mean, going through the article, she's definitely shaping everything by human motives, because I mean, her life was the human motive, because during her time she wasn't young when this happened. She wasn't that young when this happened, so obviously she grew up during a time where the women were oppressed, and she used her personal experiences and obviously others, and use those as the motives to go in front of the courts and talk about how this was all not right. And her being arrested also was responsive to the situation, because if she didn't get arrested, she would not have had the, I would say, the stepping stool to really get her voice out, because her standing up in the courts looks a lot stronger and more valuable to the people, the women and the men that want to give women a chance. It gives it more of a stagger to, or I mean, more of a, it emphasizes the deal on why women should get rights and have the right to vote. Because I feel like if she wasn't in the courtroom or on trial, I feel like her voice wouldn't have been heard as much. I mean, with what she was saying during this argument, it definitely was worth convincing people, even if she wasn't there. But having the courts in front of her and having all the people again around her that were either biased or or did support her, having those around her definitely gave it more of a bigger voice than what she actually had, because obviously women didn't have the voice that they have nowadays, but her being in that courtroom gave her voice that strength it needed to get across to either the courts, the people that were there, and basically, and more or less just show them that, hey, this is serious. Like, our voting rights need to be implemented. And like I said earlier, the 15th Amendment later ratified it and gave them the rights to vote. So obviously it was a good thing in the end. And going on, I found a political cartoon about Susan B. Anthony, which depicts about Poles, women and Chinamen not admitted, they cannot vote. That obviously stood for what she was there for, and it more or less just I kind of laugh at it now, because obviously that didn't stand after Susan B. Anthony went to the courts and then obviously started her rally on getting women that right to vote. So I like the picture because it breaks down, it obviously shows that there was a problem back then, and obviously not just for women, because it says Chinamen on there, but women were the biggest ones that were oppressed by that poll, because they should have had the right to vote. There was no reason why they couldn't, because the governing body back then, was supposed to be for all people, not just for men. And her doing all this and, standing up for women, it kind of, I look at this picture and I laugh at it, because, the fact that one woman could change the minds of millions of people to end up ratifying that and getting that taken care of, it just shows, that, just because everybody thinks it's right doesn't mean it's actually right. And Susan B. Anthony put that to the test and more or less changed America by doing that. So overall, the argument was a very strong argument. Overall, the persuasion I seen through it was argument and appeals for sure. And like I said earlier, she definitely adapted it to a certain audience, and she definitely used it, shaped by human motives. But like I said, the response to a situation, obviously her situation was the situation that got this all started, and that's was the big thing that she needed, was that kind of pedestal to get her voice out.